My dear friends, by chance, there is a link between these two readings. The first gives us what the scholars refer to as the Lucan-Pauline line of transmission of the institution of the sacred mysteries, in parallel to the Markan and Matthean one, which is slightly not different, but words come here and there which are not in the other, and they complement each other, but there are two families. Because remember that the living tradition is what they had in the early stages, and so living was it that St. John did not even want to write it down. He was so close to the origin that it was all known. We have in St. John discourse in its place of the bread of life, and what goes on then for several chapters in the Last Supper himself. We have him giving us the Mandatum, which gives us the word Maundy Thursday, where we have the actions of the Last Supper complemented in what happened on that scale. But then we have the Gospel, which also is Eucharistic in a sense, insofar as the key prayer of this good centurion has been kept in the Latin Rite, that is, those coming through the Church of Rome, the Western Patriarchate. We have those words still with us to the present time. It used to be said, as you know, several times. In the Old Rite it was 3 times by the priest, and then 3 times by the people, and you who of a certain age will remember, accompanied with this triple beating of the breast. It's actually quite a moving moment in the Old Rite still, in the intimacy of gazing at the host, which is part of the rite. You're in that position, and you've got it holding there, and you're doing that, and you're very much aware, and you're invited to say those words, Domine non sum dignus, with a certain inflection of the voice which conveys your nothingness. It's not just words, but it's a powerful recognition of one's nothingness. And by the way, that is something which, just by chance, this very day hit me through somebody's reaction, because on Holy Cross Day the other day in the Hermitage we had videoed a whole Mass in Latin in the Old Rite with the altar boys, and the father had commented in the text as he was editing it how moved he was, because I had invited him to come right next to me to get the gestures, because we wanted an educational didactic one, and he, on looking back in cold blood, was nearly moved to tears by the power of what's actually happening at the altar, which he'd never seen before, because everything suggests otherness. And he came out with this in his text, in persona Christi. He realized for the first time what it was to be a priest consecrating, because in the Old Rite, as you know, there's a certain gestuality. One is like that, elbows on the altar, gazing at the, first of all, the host, and then in one's nose nearly in the chalice, you see, for the chalice, all from memory, but it's extremely powerful, and he coughed on what's actually going on there, and what's being lost as regards the otherness of celebration. So it just, that's a parenthesis what I put there, but it's part of what I'm saying, because we see the church picked up this thing, I am not worthy. And the whole of the education of a priest up until fairly recently had that crescendo of going bit by bit towards the maximum. Now, with other people coming in with shortcuts, with these ways of doing things just like that overnight, without having gone through the minor orders and handling the sacred species without the preparation that was before there. You see, the problem is that a lot has been lost, let's face it. So just be careful that you don't get into that game, because you perhaps are at risk also of forgetting what we're doing. That never ever for 20 centuries was there a question of unconsecrated hands handling the Holy of Holies, and when people now treat it like just ordinary bread in practice, be careful, because it's not pleasing to the Lord. I remember actually being told that in no uncertain terms when I went for a short retreat with a very holy priest in Venice, and I was there, and he had a church on the Grand Canal, which he was restoring, a big church, and he let me celebrate on the high altar, and as I came down I was quite moved, and I muttered something to him, and he muttered something back to the effect that he had studied and knew more than he was saying as regards actually how things had gone, and how he saw it as an attack on the sacred. And for that reason, he felt that it could not be pleasing to our Lord, and that's more or less what he was saying. But he, therefore, was extreme in his way of not wanting to do anything but the old rite, but I could see what he was saying. He did not want to take away from what he felt was the rights of the Lord. To explain also why right now we're in a situation of this other thing that St. Paul is talking about in the first reading of factions. Because you see, people have reacted, overreacted if you like, in certain quarters and therefore gone their own way. Now the Holy Father is doing his best to heal these factions of which St. Paul already speaks here in the first reading. But be respectful, because remember, they're hurting on a deep level. If people are hanging on to certain things, it means that certain things mean a lot to them. So one must not talk down to them, because they've thought things out quite often. The only thing is that they're, after a while, caught in precisely something which is completely sealed off from the mainstream, and therefore they get more and more into a certain way of thinking, and it's not, that's the problem. Afterwards, it's very difficult dialogue. But nevertheless, it's a big issue, and don't talk down to them, because remember, they've got all history behind them. And also, if you want to see reverence, look at the other side of the church, the East, where things haven't changed. And you know how they got it. It's something which is so awful that they have a kind of fear and trembling of the Almighty. The holy doors separating, as it were, two worlds, heaven and earth. And the doors are closed. The veil is pulled and the doors are closed at certain moments. Not to be Holy Communion. It's so intimate and august that the priest is alone with the angels at Holy Communion, which is interesting. A reminder unto us that perhaps we've let go of a lot in a short time, and we've got to be careful not to lose also what should go with it. Because the truth is this: the Holy Spirit wanted to renew and not destroy the Vatican Council. And what happened was this: it was hijacked. Paul VI, in the early 70s, came out with this. He mentioned, and he said so, that the smoke of Satan had come into the temple of the Lord by some chink, some fissure. And he did say, even before then, that we have observed, because we had hoped that there would be a renewal, a revivifying of things, a new authenticity in celebration and prayer. That has happened, he said. There has been that. But then he went on, and he was quite clear in what he was trying to say. What's happened is that some sinister force has hijacked the potential that was there. I remember I was in Rome in the mid-70s, because during classics the university paid for me to go to Rome and Greece, and I was staying in the English college, which is close to the Vatican. And there, it was just after the council, and I remember with those seminarians there was a buzz in the air. The word around was aggiornamento, and they were really wanting to make something not less but more. These young seminarians, just about to be ordained, they had beautiful celebrations, but it was in the period of what should have been correct renewal. But then you see, what happened in some sectors was that bit by bit, it was not renewal, but laziness. That God was robbed of his glory, and nothing equivalent was put in its place. The proof is in practice very little as regards development of the cult. The element of minimalism has crept in, and people get very impatient if one goes over a certain time. In other words, they have not copped on. The whole element of God's glory on earth is actually material, time and effort. Effort means practice. Polyphony means hard work. Where are we at compared with even 40 years ago, when we still had full sung mass every Sunday in big parishes? Now, I wanted to approach it from another angle. It's this. This element of reverence is a profound one. In the sacred, those of us who were formed in the monastic life and into the full liturgical life were formed very carefully and given reasons for everything we did. And of course, in choir, the whole attitude is one of giving the maximum. Therefore, the education is towards giving of the body the best for the invisible as an expression of his rights. And I remember hearing, actually, when giving a retreat in France, in a monastery, a very big monastery, Fontainebleau, where they had the old rite, one of the brethren said in recreation, no, it was a ghost house, it was a daughter house in Fontainebleau. This, one of the fathers, he said, with regard to the old rite, it's full of doxologies. That is, it's full of words of glory. All the prayers are maximum. All the prayers are finishing in the full ending. All the prayers are gesturally humble. In other words, one is entering into mode. One is entering into something hugely, frightfully great. Now, that is something which also is part and parcel of true prayer anyway. One comes into prayer, coming into that presence, which one has to be aware of wherever one is, especially if the sacrament is there, it's the same. Therefore, there is an element of actually thinking. Now, what bodily posture corresponds best to that? It's not indifferent if one sits in a comfy chair for an hour before the sacrament, as though one were watching the television, or it's actually one is kneeling on, for instance, a Taizé stool for the same period, which one do. It's very, very different as regards the honour given, because actually we are physical beings. The element of interiority, which is part of reverence, is something which depends on one element in particular. It's that of letting God reign through silence, because silence is the language of mystery. And if we block out silence, we are blocking out mystery and the space. God cannot speak if there's no space. Now that's happening. It's happening in our liturgical celebrations, an unstoppable flow of words from beginning to end. It's happening even in our prayer. People are agitated in their prayer. They can't stop using vocal prayers, even in adoration. Now, this is actually quite important because it's the intimate moment of gazing, of feeling, of letting Him act on us. And if we are acting on Him, we are to some extent missing the point. He wants to reign, and He can't reign where He's being blocked out by things coming out of us, vibrations. Silence is a deep thing which permeates every element of the psyche and even of the body. You look at them, I remember in Rome we had people from India with us in college, and they could sit perfectly still in a posture something like that in chapel for a long time to lesson to us. That culture by nature favours it. In the West we are disfavoured. Now I want to put it visually. This icon I have in my oratory. The icon of the Lord is always to the right, and the icon of Our Lady, which I also have, is to the left. That's how it should be. And you see here how there's a certain majesty and dignity about our Lord in the Eastern style. This is a very ancient icon reproduced here. The date on the back is 1393 to 1394 in the Greek tradition. Now, these suggest, especially when they're in use, because they use them, kissing them many times, and they use them with these long candles before them, and they use them, of course, with incense. And as it happens, I do the same quite often at Vespers and Mass, because I have, as it happens, an Eastern censer or thurible as well, which I got from the Holy Land. It fits very well. And the atmosphere, they also even have an Eastern lamp, actually, under the one of Our Lady. So the atmosphere is pretty Eastern, and the incense suggests that straight away, because incense suggests mode, suggests otherness, suggests the odour of sanctity which actually come out of certain saints, and which one still senses on things which have touched Padre Pio, for instance. And Pio, things which have been close to his body have that odour. But the odour of sanctity is a phenomenon in the church. It is around. And it's happened now and again. I remember actually it was the feast of St. Rita. We weren't feasting it in the monastery for some reason, and I felt that she'd been badly dealt with, so I thought I'd make up for it. I'll say it on my own in the old chapel, the Carolingian chapel, in honour of her, with the proper Mass of St. Rita. And there wasn't anything in the sacristy, which is the chapel as well, at all, which could have made it. I checked, there was nothing at all in the bin or anywhere. And for the whole of the celebration, there was a very strong odour of roses, which is her flower. And I thought, that's not just roses, kind of incense, roses together. It was very interesting what was going on there. And then it stopped. I thought, thank you, St. Rita, you've got your language as well. But anyway, that, you see, suggests the otherness, because the priest comes out of the holy doors in the Eastern Rite, and he does that. There's a meaning to all these things. And by the way, the Carthusian sign of the cross is like that, actually. They use it's all, you know, they retain lots of things from the East in the Carthusian rite. But they're his blessing, you see, and they do that, and they say, Erini Bazin, peace unto all, and they reply, Gemeta tu pneumatos, and with your spirit. And now you've got the word here, the gospel. Now, that is the element of blessing, that is grace, and teaching. The word, the logos, is teaching. Now, how does the logos teach? He teaches when he has a space in the heart, when we are at prayer, we become aware. If one is gazing at the Lord in love, one is gazing at essential love, if for any length of time one is gazing at the host, one after a while becomes aware that one is being looked at, and one acquires his thoughts. He is able to impress upon the heart certain things, and he does, if we give him the space. Things he wants to weed out, or things he wants done, or ways of looking at things. He gives us his vision and thought, the mind of Christ, as St. Paul says. But he does also using precisely this form, which is the written word, which in our culture comes to us even on screen, but it's the same dynamic. It comes also through the voice, without it being written, as in this moment in time is happening. It's coming to you, and it probably actually will go through that machine and go further away. So a word can relive, even in time, if it's recorded. A word can actually change. You think, the words have changed lives. Your life. Those who are married said at one point, I will. That was a consent which changed two lives and created new lives. And life is made of words which change. Sometimes a word has an irreversible effect. So has a thought. Yesterday, I came out of the church there in Stockholm, and there were no less than 18 missed calls. What's going on here? It was a lady who wanted urgently to bring her son, who wanted to commit suicide. He was 17, and anyway, she came eventually and brought him. I got him to promise not to commit suicide, and we calmed him down. But he was actually a very good lad, great faith, and you know what kept him? It was a thought. It was this thought, because he had faith. If I do it, even though I can't bear this anymore, I will go to hell. And that thought kept him back. And I encouraged him to think about that, because at least he'd got his act together. He'd thought the consequences actually don't stop there. It only starts. And if one is aware, it is actually a very, very dangerous way to end one's existence. It doesn't take the problem away at all. It gives you another problem, which might be frightfully, awfully worse. So that's the situation with regard to the thought. A thought can change all eternity. A thought. And this also brought me back to when I was young, when we only had that. Because in the evangelical Baptist situation in which I was until very early on I got the Catholic faith, it was only that. But it was that, of course, which brought me to the Catholic faith, because precisely it was because I was aware that there had to be one truth, that I was not comfortable with these factions which have become churches, or not churches, because you can only call a church what has a bishop in the apostolic succession, but they become ecclesial communities, and therefore they have their own thing, but it's only a part. Now, the words that they have do sanctify, proof. Look at a Protestant when he's at prayer. The way he does it, they don't often, it depends which one there is, but often they only have the heart and the mind to pray with. They don't have the books that we have, but they pray. And it's encouraging to see that, because there's no fooling, because you can see straight away the minister who's really praying. Because if he's not praying, they'll soon pick it up and he won't be employed, because they have to employ him. But they have also the preaching. Now the preaching changes lives. I remember that was the attitude. Only having the word, there was a thirst for the word. And one would pray coming into church. It was part of the way that one came into church. One bowed one's head in prayer. It was kind of part of the ceremony. Everyone silently before the whole thing started. And they, before they came in, were praying in what corresponds to the sacristy. They would pray and then they would come in. They would ask for a word. And there was a whole preparation towards the sermon. Because the prayer, because the first reading would be a very long one, the only reading actually, on which the sermon was based. There'd be a hymn and so on, and then there'd be a long prayer, and then the sermon. Now that sermon had to sustain the whole flock for a week. So it was something which gave you food for thought. Now, what I'm saying is this, they only had that. But they were often more faithful to the grace they had compared with what we have, the maximum. Now that's the problem. We have it, the Word. We don't sit down and read Scripture with that same devotion. Why not? And with regard to what we do have, we've become very banal and blasé about the maximum and the sacred. So just remember, my friends, we can't have a shortcut. If you took all that effort to our ancestors, we must do the same. And if it's not happening on the level of the parishes, we must do it in adoration and in our own privacy. Go into somewhere where the Lord can minister to your soul. Now that leads me to the final point. It's this. We are gravely handicapped human beings in 2012. We are psychologically damaged, crippled. Now, if one has only books, a child who has only the written word and no artificial impulse, that child is far more receptive. A child, and therefore an adult, who is bombarded by much noise, is distracted and psychologically incapable of having the same force of attention. There are more words coming into him and he's less receptive to their power. The same is true of all of us if we're exposed to a lot of artificial noise. Therefore, we are responsible for having a lot of artificial noise when we don't have to. It's not indifferent. Now, I just want to look at a few tiny areas which are very concrete because it damages our interior life if we don't look at them. Concrete issues. 1. If we have unnecessarily background noise where we are working, that damages the soul because we have to listen to someone else's thought. We can't listen to his. This can't be done. If we go further and put on an obliterating means like the screen, the television, which takes also the vision, we're even more absorbed and sucked in and blocking out eventual grace and message and intimacy from the Lord. It's our choice, that knob or that thing. Internet. Now, be careful. One goes on initially onto internet for a good reason, but one stays on it. One goes from one to the other, and the psychology, as it were, of internet, especially things like YouTube, is such that one lets time go. One is absorbed, and time goes by the hour into that screen. And all that's with it now, for certain people, is extremely insidious because you're dialoguing in different forms with the whole planet. And it's time. Now you compare a child now trying to work with all that clutter and time lost with what it was even when we were in school. There's a big, big difference. They're psychologically damaged and weakened. But the other, and it's this, it's the different form of telephone. It's not just the landline as it was, it's a whole load of stuff in your pocket. Now look, all that can come out of the telephone now, you've got everything on your mobile phone. Now, you look at a person, as soon as they're alone, they're going into that mobile phone. They're not alone. They've got the whole world in their hands. They can't bear to be alone. The first thing they do, they fidget. Damaging, damaging. Solitude does not exist. But you're into it too if you're not careful. Now, there is also the element of handling, being in control of this instrument. Now, in practice, at home in the Hermitage, my landline is always off the hook with the recorded message at the end. And the end, if they want to, they can get to the mobile, and again, that's on silent. And I am in control. When I want to, I catch up. And it's a huge difference. You're not at people's beck and call. Because my brother taught me that. He taught me with regard to internet and with regard to these things here. By the way he does it, and he's got a lot of responsibility, my brother, head of the television. He knows exactly that life is not worth messing up with these automatic access to people just at their beck and call. You have to be in control of the media, because otherwise your life is being sucked into them and damaged, because you're living other people's lives and thoughts all the time. My last thought, it's this. way back in 1995, I wasn't quite sure what was going to happen, and when I came back from Rome, Ellen took me actually not to Cunacroft but to Westport to live for a while with Sister Irene, who was trying to found there, because Cunacroft was in a mess, as you know. And anyway, there, I wasn't sure, I knew it was pretty absolute, there was no contact at all with the world, it was a real thing out there in the wilds of the West. A telephone, no telephone. And basically, I remember thinking, wow, because I was in Rome, opposite the telephone, and it was something opposite in Rome there, in the house, the mother house that we had there in Rome. You could see, you could hear them a mile off. And boy, if you met somebody from Sicily, they got a little contingent from Sicily there on the telephone, you could even understand what they were saying by their gestures on the phone. Anyway, well, that was going on in Rome, you see, opposite that machine there. So I thought, wow, in this place now in Italy, in Ireland, at least there'd be no phone. And I wrote this, I was talking about the bliss of a life, because if all that clutter is away, then I knew at last there will be virginity of soul, not the prostitution of my soul to the waves of the air, only his voice and clarity of vision in the soul. It's hugely liberating, the absence of artificial noise. So I just finished with this, which, as I say, was a cri de coeur when at last I will be away from the channel of ungrace. O silent wire, wherein a fire divine moves o'er the earth, and joining star with star, marks in the depths of man, whose heart doth pine upon a night to hold what lies afar. Afar, I say. Nay, nay, through thee, wide ear, and voice to ofter voice, full near to where the listening ear doth beat, for two meet here, where thou alone dost hold two souls not there. This little trinket, hung with hanging charge, awaiting in the air, alive and well, where presences see, feel, full neath shocks large, too large for but a little bell, is one bliss I shall curse, and on our isle we shall this call umbilic